Through the mists comes forth RPGaDay! In the year 2021, RPGaDay comes back for its 8th year. A time in August when every day we tackle another question or topic by answering in a way that uplifts the gaming community and answers questions people might have about this crazy hobby of ours that serves to build the community and bring it up, that many of us make blogs about, video blogs, art, or great works. In celebration of the community of gamers, I welcome you to RPGaDay 2021. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages. I am Rob, or Omnisci in certain channels, or the Dungeon Tutor in others. And today I am here for RPGaDay, Day 7. Day 7, the 7th of August. The topic for today is small. The word small. So, in this, I would like to share a bit of a revelation with you. Now, I personally am generally known to run fairly lengthy campaigns myself when I'm running games. Oftentimes, my games can run 2 or 3 years, taking, upwards of 50 sessions to complete, which makes them medium to longish in length. I know that, for instance, a lot of people who follow the adventure paths in D&D or make heavy use of modules are used to breaking their adventures up into more bite-sized chunks or wrapping everything up in 20 to 30 sessions. So, the fact that I do like longer campaigns, it gives you more chance to develop your character. And quite honestly, when you get to have a relationship with your character, you don't want to put that character down necessarily and go on to something else. You want to enjoy your time with your friend, that you sit down at the table and instantly feel yourself sliding into the clothes and the mannerisms of your character. I've been there. I've played in some fairly long-term campaigns, and I've felt that and enjoyed it tremendously. But, that being said, there's plenty of room in the world of gaming for small experiences. Now, my prior experience has largely been with things like pickup games, like games at a convention, where you may not know the other players around you. You just sit down, have a good time, and then when you're done, you wrap it up and move on. You've been entertained, you've rolled some dice, you've done something cool. Maybe you had mishaps and you didn't succeed. That sometimes happens. And you have an experience to walk away with, which can be fine. But in general, I was always of the opinion, let players make their own characters so that they have some sort of attachment, and then tell a grand story worthy of the adventure, worthy of the characters that they bother to make. And watch the characters develop, grow, struggle, overcome, and then struggle and overcome again. That was my blueprint. But I decided I needed to do something a little different. So when I started up a new group, instead, what I had the idea of is to give them bite-sized chunks of adventure for 3 major reasons. And if you know me, you know I love to enumerate things. This is my 3-reason list for small adventures that I've done to my players. Number 1, each game can teach you something different. So, for instance, if I start out with a game like Ghostbusters from 1986, Ghostbusters was really useful because it was a game that was relatively rules light, very easy to pick up and learn. It's not serious, it's not really stark, so the players don't necessarily feel that they need to master the game in order to have a good time engaging and interacting with it. Number 2, as a comedy game, it allows you to break the ice relatively easily. So they had a lot of fun Not just because they got to do the cool things. Sometimes falling on their face was hilarious, and everybody had a good laugh at each other's expense, which helped the group to grow a little bit more closely knit, which was really useful. And the last reason was because it was small, because there were no ultimate consequences. They had to succeed, and they had to succeed now. They had a small time frame, so everything was compressed a little bit, so they couldn't just dawdle and go running off onto a side quest. They had to focus on the here and now because they wanted to win. They wanted to get beyond this point. They wanted to have their victory over the threat that was before them without stopping and backing off and trying a different angle. That actually worked really well, and it allowed the group to bond, to learn basic role-playing principles, to not necessarily need rules and maneuvers explained to them ad nauseum to the point where they felt they everything they could do was right in front of them. And we had a really good time, which was nice to just be able to tell a fairly narrative story, allow everybody to kind of narrate as their own characters would do, and, just generally enjoy ourselves. Then, after a few sessions, we stopped playing that, and we switched to another bite-sized chunk. This time we played Dungeons & Dragons, basic Dungeons & Dragons from back in the day. And again, it was to do 3 basic things. They've already had the party formed, so that wasn't so much of an issue. The reasons for doing Dungeons & Dragons, again, were threefold. First of all, to teach them how to play a game with a fair amount of crunch, where what you could do was actually fairly delineated. You had hard statistics on how good you were, how strong, how dexterous. They also were in a very real danger of dying. They knew how much punishment they could take before. That isn't the case in Ghostbusters, which is really abstract on purpose. In D&D, that was hanging over their heads, so that level of mortality was also something they had to come to grips with. And since several player characters died, they got to understand that some games, they aren't going to be coddled. They aren't going to just be allowed to go on and make big blunders and come through it on the other side, guaranteed. That was a good lesson for them to learn as well. The final lesson, of course, is the feel of just adventuring and your characters exploring the world around them and using their initiative to expand the world. Not necessarily just a quick narration and a die roll to see what they notice and what they miss. No, a very general description and then let them poke into the corners and find things was the approach that they took and learn some of those old school principles. This small sample size, again, stopped them from, the moment they took a single scratch, backing out and said, we'll approach the dungeon again when we're back to full health. No, time was a finite commodity, and they pressed on where they had to. And that worked out pretty well for them. They ended up completing their adventure, and even though, again, they lost 2 characters, they were able to pick up and continue on and finish the adventure. So, playing in a game with mortality, with more defined rules, was something they found they were able to do, and did pretty well, all things considered. Then finally we switched to the Princess Bride role-playing game. Again, a bite-sized amount, roughly the length of a movie, which seems to work pretty well. You had encounters, you had peaks and valleys, you had building up to small climaxes and resolving them and going back to the story and building suspense and hitting a climax, and just like building a movie. It really felt pretty good, actually, as far as comparing it to an action romance comedy. Plenty of comedy, touch of romance, lots of action. It was a good time, all things considered. We had several different encounters with different flavors. The party took advantage of their roles, which was nice, and really approached different struggles differently, appropriate to their characters. And it worked out really well to make them better at narrative storytelling, at narrative role-playing, really, which was everything that I wanted. Now, could we have started in the beginning and played something like 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons? Yes, we could have. But would it have accelerated the quickness on how well they learn each other's mannerisms, their styles, and what they could be comfortable with? I don't think so. Would it have helped them to learn a wider variety of different skills and ability? No, because quite clearly, without playing some of these different styles, they would have been used to one style. And I thought that would have been a wasted bit of effort. Now, after they've gone through those 3 initial short stories, now I feel they're ready for the payoff of telling something quite a bit longer, and that's what we're doing. But small games have a value. And people who tell me that they've been running one campaign with the same group for 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, it makes me think, I hope in that time you bowed out for a game or maybe a week or a month so that you could try something else. Because honestly, that almost would be exhausting to show up. Yeah, you're very comfortable with your character. Yes, you get amazingly comfortable with your world and probably have helped to build it. But you've missed out on so many other experiences that you could have. Even if you didn't necessarily have to sacrifice the entire larger campaign, I hope you took time to take some small bites into other things so that you could be a more well-rounded gamer or have all these other experiences that are also possible besides the fairly narrow scope of your original game, your original campaign. And while I'm sure that as you played it and you were very comfortable with that game, you probably developed your own style and your maybe set of house rules and other things that made you more comfortable. If you look back at how you played when you started compared to how you play now, I'm sure you're much better. Much, much better. But I also can't help but think if you had played some other games, like if you started playing Dungeons and Dragons, the original, old school, and you've had a campaign that stretched from 1975 on up to today, good on you. That's pretty impressive. But did you ever play Vampire the Masquerade? Did you ever get a taste for a little bit more loose weave game with characters with interesting secrets and dynamics to them and powers that others could employ over them that sometimes took away their license to do what they want because they were bounded by the world and the powers that they learned to hate when they were exercised over their heads? Did you ever play a game like Shadowrun where you had to actually worry about not worry, but you had to think, how is it that my character can survive on the mean streets of this world? Do I go with magic and become a mage and have amazing powers? Do I become a street samurai and completely chrome myself and get some awesome fighting skills and awesome guns and gear? And maybe do I choose to be a different race than a human? Maybe I'll embrace being a dwarf and be tough and strong, or an elf and be lithe and quick. Do I be a troll and just be an unstoppable juggernaut? There's lots of options and different ways of playing in a world that's both familiar and alien at the same time. But if all you've ever played was Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, you aren't going to understand that experience quite as well. I mean, in a broad sense, you will know, but until you've played that game, you're going to have a hard time speaking the parlance or understanding different styles of rules like that really sometimes do offer a different element of gameplay than what you might be used to. I do encourage people to take small bites of role-playing games and try a wider variety than perhaps just their favorite that they play. In fact, my channel Lair of Omnisci has frequently gone out of its way to talk about and extol various games that aren't just Dungeons and Dragons, that are something away from the beaten path that so many others have tread upon. With my Dungeon Tutor, I intend to show people who are curious about what are these other games that are out there, and maybe help people to find some games that match their interest, perhaps better than the ones they've been exposed to at present. That's certainly my hope, and that is the value of these small games, or the small game experience, that can teach you much, and give you a nice break from what you've been doing before. And some people have fallen so in love with that, that's all they do. Small little campaign scenarios, little bite-sized pocket stories, and one-shots. Which is fine. I think if that's all you do miss out a little bit on the attraction of a character that evolves and develops over time, especially if you've got gifted role players who allow their characters to develop according to the experiences they have, as opposed to a pre-designed build that they've had planned before they even put pencil to paper, or digital ink, what have you. But that certainly can be an interesting way of role-playing and can, I find, really complement a person's role-playing experience to make them a better gamer in general. This applies to both players as well as game masters. So that's my perspective, and I hope you enjoy it. Maybe you find something in that of interest. I hope so. But that's my experience with going down into smaller bite-sized chunks of role-playing games. And I think I've become much better as a game master since I started doing this. I've certainly become more hopeful to play some of these crazy games that I've been finding. I've been finding games that I didn't even know because I wasn't looking for a long time. I just recently found this game called Devil's Run, which is basically a role-playing in a world similar to Mad Max. Never would have gotten this before. But since I've started growing as a game master again and playing with other peoples that are trying my skills in different ways, I think I'm going to try to run this. Modifius made it. It's both advertising their 2D20 adventure system as well as the Savage Worlds. So I might find some interesting rule stuff in there. Will I tell a long campaign? I don't think so. I'll probably tell a small bite-sized campaign again. A little story, similar to playing in a movie. So, with a beginning, a middle, and an end. Exciting stuff. So thank you for joining me again. That's my take on the word small for today. A small video for a small topic in its own way. But I do want to thank you for joining me. Of course, if you have any comments, I always enjoy engaging, so feel free to leave them and I will read them and I will respond one way or the other. Also, if you just stumbled onto this video and you liked it, feel free to like and subscribe. I certainly appreciate it. And I will keep making more and more of these videos. So, once more, as Omnisci, as the Dungeon Tutor, and of course as me as Rob, thank you for joining me. I hope that you join me next time, but until then, roll some dice, play some games, have some fun, but stay safe. Thank you, and farewell.